melody filled the spaces in the church to complement its incomparable architecture. This all combines to create an ambient sanctuary that is St. Mary's the Virgin, the historical cathedral in the heart of the city of Johannesburg.
The sense of peace and tranquility and the fantastic views that one gets of the high altar as you walk in through the west doors, you're immediately aware this is a place of God. God's presence is very much here in the building, and person after person will tell you when they come in here they can sense God's presence. Somehow this building has got something about it which conveys that message.
St. Mary's, which was then one of the few racially integrated churches in the city that is the pulse of South Africa, is best known for its strong ties to the struggle against apartheid.
Hallelujah. The Lord we pray.
More significantly, the cathedral is remembered as the church that built Desmond Tutu as a respected priest.
We want freedom! We want freedom! We want peace! We want peace!
Whose sermons reflected the lived experience of the majority of South Africans seeking comfort from oppression.
A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so are you to love one another.
In 1975, a young Desmond Tutu was appointed Dean of St. Mary's the Virgin, becoming the first black person to hold the position.
Lord, we pray for the needs of this country.
The current dean recalls the impact of Desmond Tutu's arrival at the church and believes his leadership came at a very critical time.
But in you there is hope.
There were two responses to him being appointed dean. And of course, there were those whom from his own who were very happy, very delighted, very excited, about a black dean in the Anglican Cathedral of Johannesburg. And remember, this cathedral is one of the biggest in Africa. And as you know, being in Joburg, that's where the engine of Africa is. So for you to have a dean who is black in Johannesburg in that time in society was quite a miracle.
The cleric, who was at St. Mary's at the time, recalled how Desmond Tutu's appointment as the church's first black dean was not welcomed by all in the Anglican Church.
I joined a little after that when, who's now Bishop Tutu, was then Dean Tutu, was the first black man at the cathedral. And it was my introduction to Anglicanism and to South African politics as it really is. Because the cathedral is always very real about the issues of injustice in this country. And Bishop Tutu he isn't known as a political figure, but what people don't know, he was a superb theologian and a wonderful preacher and a very, very pastoral person.
Some believe that this house of the Lord was not a place to preach about the country's political situation. But for most, his sermons were a reminder of equality of all, irrespective of color.
The involvement of Desmond Tutu here at St. Mary's Cathedral as Dean was a chance to get close to black South Africa and black South Africans, which in those days was incredibly difficult to do, because the cathedral had been multiracial since the mid-1960s. It was a place where I could meet South Africans from all walks of life without any feeling of it being strained. And that to me was incredibly valuable, because we weren't living in a silo within this congregation like we were out in the secular world. And it was a privilege to be able to work with them and alongside them and not for them. It was very much a partnership, and the leadership of the cathedral in those days, with the bishop being Timothy Baven and Desmond Tutu as dean, was a very powerful combination of people.
He really gave us wonderful, marvelous sermons which uplifted us. And he would talk, politics in the church. And related, church-related, God-related. And during that time, we were still worshiping with many white people, and many of them left the church and went to the northern suburb churches. He was very brave. He had no fears whatsoever.
St. Mary's was completed back in 1929. Its builders could not imagine that more than 100 years later, their beautiful cathedral will be famous for its rich history. On his return after 30 years in exile, Oliver Tambo chose to worship at this church, where his wife, Adelaide Tambo, was a church elder who received the Anglican Church's highest honor. Following his death, the iconic ANC president will live here for his burial in Benoni. The apartheid regime and its sympathizers felt politics and the church should be separated, and did whatever they could to push their agenda. But most African priests believed that they were the shepherds of a flock that was marginalized, troubled and harassed by an evil system.
It is the role of the church to be the presence of God in a way that gives life in all its fullness. So liberation is born out of that. So it is strange then to say that now this too must not be, it will never happen, because the gospel speaks to all areas of our existence, whether it's education, it's social, it's economics, it's politics, it's business. Religion is everywhere. You walk with it. You can close your door and say, I've got nothing to do with religion, but I bet you won't be able to.
And that is an example of really what the Christian church should be. Jesus came to save all people in all senses, and that doesn't only mean your salvation, also means liberation, justice, means for the poor to live and become the human beings they were meant to be. And I think a picture of life in all its fullness is what you feel when you have Bishop Tutu, and his lovely sense of humor.
After a year, Desmond Tutu left his post here to become the Bishop of Lesotho. Today, over 4 decades later, the Cathedral of St. Mary's the Virgin remains a place of safety, a center of hope and democratic activity.